Mesdames et Messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you. Our speaker will arrive shortly, but I think it's a good opportunity as this public lecture is organized in partnership with the Europaeum, and that since we have the pleasure of having with us tonight the Secretary General of the Europaeum, Paul Flaser, to give him the floor to tell you in a few words what the Europaeum is. And so we will wait our speaker while listening to Paul Flaser. Please.
Well, thank you very much, Director Philippe. The good news is that our speaker is on campus, but he's been dropped in a strange place which he doesn't recognize. And so a search party is out looking for him. And he actually managed to catch up time. It's been incredibly windy in Britain, and all the planes were delayed. I was myself an hour late, so his plane was over an hour late. And of course, it's very windy in this turbulent world, and we're going to discuss globalization and all the problems. So maybe it's kind of appropriate metaphor for tonight. But thank you for your patience, and I know I say that most humbly because I'm in Switzerland, and you have a particular reputation. What I did want to say is just a few words, just to warm up. So treat me as a warm-up act, because Will is absolutely brilliant and will knock you out when he comes, to say that we are in the very privileged position of celebrating a birthday. It's actually our 25th birthday year this year from the legal foundation of the Europaeum. And it's very ironic because we can actually track our origins to a famous speech that Mrs. Thatcher made at Bruges. Mrs. Thatcher was a sort of we can call her a reluctant European. And she got quite a lot of what she wanted in the 1980s, which is the irony of it. She got the single market, she got enlargement, and she got opt-out. So she got three big winning hands, if you like, if you play bridge. But still, in 1990, I think it was, she went to Bruges and made this very lukewarm speech about Europe. In fact, some people said it was even negative. And so a number of visionaries, I call them Europeanists, people who believe in Europe in its bigger sense, got together and decided we needed to set up an intellectual club that promoted ideas about Europe. And it's kind of ironic, isn't it? From that Bruges speech, we move forward, and now we're in the sort of Brexit period. So it's a little bit kind of sad. But those people were very far-sighted, were very visionary. They included George Weidenfeld, the famous publisher, Ronnie Grierson, who used to run GEC, and indeed our own Pierre Keller, who sits here and has been on the Institute board for many, many years. So a number of visionaries, Roy Jenkins, Peter Pulser, Klaus Moser, several people. Some of you have got the little leaflet so you can see some of the names. And what they thought was what is correct. Europe is more than being about institutions and structures. And you in Switzerland can understand that very well. It's about relationships, it's about values, it's about ideas, it's about a way of being. And the Europaeum is about that. Of course, we manifest ourselves by a series of academic collaborations, and these kind of high-profile lectures, which we've done with great pride with Geneva, with Oxford, and with other universities. We have 12 university members, is an example of that. But last week I was in Prague running a graduate workshop on the crisis in Europe's values, looking particularly at the problems arising out of the migration debate. And we had several brilliant Geneva students there, some of whom, well, many of whom are here today, I think. And we had a really exciting time, and we created a kind of bubble for 3 days where we just talked to each other and talked about all the ideas. And so what are we about? We're about working with young scholars who we think are the future of Europe. We're multidisciplinary. We deal with current concerns. We go beyond the ivory tower. We don't just want the pure academic. We want the journalist, the politician, the civil servant, the think tank person, and we want to mix it all up. And we want debate. Above all, we want debate and discussion. We want provocation. And I have to apologize because last time I did something here, I brought a rather dangerous man, Norbert Hofer, and that created a lot of debate. But I was very proud that we managed that in a very civilized way. So tonight, coming to tonight, we, I think, tick all these boxes by having a provocation from a brilliant public intellectual about an issue of current concern. I'm going to pass the floor back to Philippe now to introduce. No? He's such a polite, decent man. I have to say that since I have been coming to Geneva for maybe 2 decades, I've been wonderfully blessed to see this institution grow. I mean, grow in numbers, grow in influence, grow in intellectual dynamism and power, and obviously grow physically. And because you have this language of petals, I'm going to say I've been privileged to see it blossom into a magnificent institution, a very influential institution in the higher education landscape. And you know, one of the key figures, if I can just take this chance, because it's not often that you get this chance, it has obviously been Philippe Bourrin, the director. And I think that he's, of course, showed very efficient leadership, and he's showed very serious leadership. But I want to say he's also showed very brave leadership, and that's why we're sitting in this wonderful hall, and we're going to enjoy ourselves this evening, and it's wonderful to see such a terrific audience. And we now must go to the main menu. I was the hors d'oeuvre. I'm delighted that you know, as we go towards Brexit, and we have now triggered Article 50, I'm delighted that in our club of leading European universities, obviously Oxford, my university, and Will's university, but Geneva, and I was thinking we ought to hurry up and get Oslo in as well, so that the outliers are not kind of swamped by the inliers. So it's a particular pleasure that we have this partnership with Geneva. We're going to have to work together. And we're going to have to work together to solve some of the problems that have emerged, are emerging, and that Will is going to discuss in our more global world, and look at some of the issues that probably have been bubbling under for a number of years, but are now incredibly apparent. It's a great pleasure to introduce Will Hutton. He's a very distinguished public commentator. He's held many important offices, but most significantly, he was editor of The Observer, which is one of the great newspapers of Europe, and he now remains you know, very distinguished columnist. I mean, many of us turn immediately to his column on Sunday morning to be told what to think for the next week. We know it's going to be not only insightful but correct in that sort of progressive liberal sense of correct. So we're going to enjoy you, Will. Delighted that you're here. Thank you for braving the winds. I've been telling folk about the problems of the winds, and now you're going to tell us about the winds in the global order.
Thank you very much, Warren. I'm astonished and delighted that there's so many people here. Gosh, and I'm very sorry that Storm Doris closed part of London Heathrow, delaying even the Swissair flight. But anyway, it's a presentation, and it's oh yeah, where are we? It should where are we? Just scroll up. Where are we? If you put date modified, I think, just click on that. And can the world order hold? I think that's the, there you go. Wonderful. There we are, very good. Super. And I do this, do I? And yeah, there we go. Look, a preamble, then I get on with it. I really want to tell a story about two right-wing coups, one in America, one in the United Kingdom, and an accelerating march to the right in the European Union, Enlightenment values that sit behind Western civilization, in my view, being really put on the defensive. I want to describe what impact that's having in both these two leading Anglo-Saxon countries, but also actually in the values that underpin the world system. And I'm going to ponder whether it's going to get worse before it gets better, which I think it probably is, and actually what the future might hold as we live through a period ahead which could be as disordered as the period between 1875 and 1945 was, the period which we're all used to be living in, this post-war kind of international and domestic settlement that has produced such stability and such prosperity. In 1950, 70% of the world's population lived in absolute poverty. In 2015, only 10% do. And globalization may have created huge instabilities and big inequalities within many countries, but it's has been a beneficial kind of impact on the world at large. All that is now in peril, and I guess you're here in such numbers because, like me, you. Sorry, can you go out? Not hearing me, I must say. You missed nothing. I'm just clearing my throat. Okay, I'll get on with it now, okay? Okay. I want to kick off by just having the kind of Will Hutton view, and there'll be people in the audience who will contest some of this, but I hope not all of this. I want to just sketch what I think are the great Enlightenment values. This is actually Geneva, Berlin, Edinburgh, Paris, great European crucibles of the Enlightenment. And it was Kant who came up with the great kind of Enlightenment catchphrase, to dare to know, via the testing of trusted evidence. And it was through discussion and debate in a public realm, not dominated by crown or by church, but a public realm. There was a sphere of publicness that a common space we held in common, where we discussed and debated truth. There was, you were allowed your opinions, but you weren't allowed your facts. Objectivity and impartiality were possible. The great Enlightenment thinkers, Voltaire, of course, in this city, were skeptics about religion and ritual. And they believed that human beings had inalienable rights to live a life that they had reason to value, to hold their rulers to account, to have redress against the arbitrary abuse of power, to enjoy justice, to express themselves freely. And that led to a second set of propositions, that legitimate government must encompass a conception of democracy, that government institutions should be checked and balanced in order to inhibit and constrain the growth of arbitrary power, that there was a conception of law, impartial law, that was underpinned by universal principles of jurisprudence. You can argue what they were, but they were independently implemented and independently adjudicated of the executive and legislative branches of government. Above all, you were tolerant of others, and you accepted the interdependence of humankind. Great Enlightenment values. I believe in them all my life, and I lay any money you like that every single person in this room does too. But it's in peril. We live in an era in which belief has become more important than evidence. Michael Gove, one of the protagonists of the British referendum campaign, famously said, when challenged about evidence, that he was talking nonsense, just airily waved his hand and said, "We've had enough of experts." Donald Trump's press spokesman has said, challenged by the you could see for yourself that there weren't as many people in Donald Trump's inauguration as there were in Obama's, 1.9 million at Obama's, 250,000 at Donald Trump's, contested that. "We have alternative facts," she famously said. The discussion is overtly manipulated. The media has become weaponized. Fox News in the United States, the centre-right press in Britain. These are these aren't upholders or pillars upholding the public square. They're silos, echo chambers in which similarly held values and their truth and their evidence are kind of have reverberated and exaggerated. There's been a return of absolutist religious faith, particularly, of course, in the Muslim world, but not actually beginning to appear in many other religions. Refugees and immigrants are not parts of an interdependent humanity in which actually how you treat them says something about who you are. They are distrusted strangers. Democracy, the custodian of the Enlightenment and the way you hold truth to power and hold power holders to account, offers weak government. It is the authoritarian exercise of power by the Chinese State Council or President Putin that is admired rather than weak democracies. Checks and balances obstruct effective executive action. The law and jurisprudence is not based on impartial, objective principles which all of us can buy into. The law is liberal. The law carries the incubus of liberality. The European Court of Human Justice is seen on the right in British politics not as the custodian of universal human rights, a shield in defense of democracy and our values, which is how Winston Churchill conceived it when it was founded. It's seen as carrying the virus, the incubus of liberalism, exactly how Donald Trump sees the 4 liberal judges on the Supreme Court. In this context, blood, tribe, and nation are the only reliable compasses and social glue. And international institutions, the United Nations, all those UN institutions, some of them based here, World Trade Organization, IMF, World Bank, all of them, protocols on climate change, constrain the nation in the exercise of its authority, which binds its citizens together. The Enlightenment thinkers are in retreat, on the defensive. Enlightenment values are mocked, and in my country, to believe in the rule of law, to believe that Parliament should have a voice in the exercise of Article 50, was actually to expose yourself to a witch hunt because you opposed, allegedly, the will of the people expressed in the referendum. So where has this come from? Well, I think it began in Switzerland, in Montpellier, when a bunch of thinkers around Hayek in the 50s invade against the kind of international institutions that were being built at that time, and actually kind of the unholy alliance, as they saw it, between liberal conservatism and liberal social democracy around a form of mixed economy and Keynesianism that they felt was constraining kind of an Ayn Rand conception of individualism. They were necessarily, because they constrained individual choices, coercive. And they've celebrated markets, distrusted collective action. And what that's morphed in the last 10 or 15 years into attack on any form of collective action. That's been happening side by side, globalization, and I'm in favor of openness and in favor of globalization, but there's no doubt that it's produced inequality within countries and enormous and difficult to manage interdependencies between them. Just think of the international financial crisis of 2008-9, or think of law of the sea, the multiple kind of areas in which the interdependencies between states and jostling for advantage is extraordinarily hard to manage within the decaying institutions of the post-war settlement. The United States, the United Kingdom, apostles of openness, apostles of the Doha round of world trade, apostles of capital market liberalization, apostles of labour market flexibility, were, of course, and here it has to be said, were gamed, were ruthlessly gamed by China and by Germany, who both have run for more than 3 decades extraordinary trade surpluses, the counterpart of which is trade deficits in Britain and America, accelerating the rate of deindustrialization. Many of you will be impressed by the fact that Hillary Clinton won 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. What you don't read is that in 3,000 US counties, Donald Trump won a majority in 2,400 of them. The votes for Hillary Clinton piled up in 600 counties, mainly in the western East Coast and around the Great Lakes cities. It was a similar story in my country. There are 651 parliamentary constituencies. The very, very narrow vote, 700,000 out of an electorate of over 30 million, that voted for Brexit, they were focused in 475 parliamentary constituencies. Those 2,400 US counties only accounted for 30% of US GDP. They were where the non-college educated whites and their counterparts in the UK said that 3 decades of current account deficits in which Germany and China actually had the surpluses, which they never, ever revalued their currencies to do anything about. Indeed, some of the stuff that's said about Germany inside the euro by the Trump people, sadly, because you'll find no fiercer critic of Donald Trump than me, but sadly are true. And in this climate, that it's easy to put together that anti-Enlightenment case and make the populist appeal. And it's being made in Holland, it's being made in Austria, it is being made by Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, and that it's arguably both the Polish and the Hungarian governments express it now. In this world, the only legitimate collective action is the nation. America first, America first, America first. And the will of the people, 48%, 16 million people did not vote for Brexit, but they can be omitted. The voice of the nation is who the right-wing plotters want to characterize as their people. It's a very serious situation. And the order's been shaken to its roots. The values that underpin the UN institutions, I got dropped by the taxi. My cup of happiness overfloweth. Having spent some hours at Heathrow, I got deposited at the wrong end of this building, actually, in front of the United Nations buildings. But the values underpinning these UN institutions have been shattered. The Doha round went nowhere. Chinese mercantilism goes unchecked. What is the reproach for China's invasion of Crimea? The stupid invasion of Iraq. I actually got on my knees privately in front of Prime Minister Tony Blair in January 2002 in the study adjoining the Cabinet Room in number 10 and pleaded with him not to invade. It was obvious that there were no weapons of mass destruction. It was obvious that overflying was working in constraining Saddam Hussein. It was obvious that that we had no capacity to build a state after we'd beaten him. It was obvious that the kickback would mean the end of the New Labour project. But he wanted to stick with the American alliance, as he said for the last 15 years. And that was what he said then, that's what he says now. But actually, that liberal internationalism, in which self-appointed custodians of the order kind of did things without the sanction of the United Nations, has helped this process along by no small means. And now we have two anchors of the system, the US and the UK, who were actually, the reliable upholders of an open order, detaching themselves from it, detaching themselves from the EU and detaching themselves from the World Trade Organization. I mean, Trump's litany of things in his first 30 days are quite extraordinary. And that is considering the imposition of an import levy on all imports into the United States. They're going to try and make it congruent with World Trade Organization rules by pleading that because they don't have value-added tax in the States, it's a surrogate of value-added tax. That won't stand. Renegotiating NAFTA signal. China is going to be named a currency manipulator. Thereby, within 12 months, all the pieces to trigger not just a growth of trade unilateralism, but actually retaliation are in place. And that is in a world in which each country, whether it be Modi in India, Xi in China, every country is kind of jostling for an advantage, thinking that they can be mercantilists too, they can game the system. The refugee crisis grows, 50 million displaced people in 2012, 65 million now. Is the EU going to hold? One way of looking at what's happened is that it's true that David Cameron made a grotesque error. But you can turn it around and say, why is President Juncker still in post, having lost his second biggest member state? It wouldn't have taken much, another 10 or 15%, to have given David Cameron a piece of paper which would have been less mocked than it was, and actually probably just prevented Boris Johnson or Michael Gove from going over to the Leave side. Juncker has his part to play, as well as a craven Labour Party, as well as an absurdly xenophobic right-wing press. Everyone has got their walk-on part in this drama. And many people in the European Union, I think, should actually ask hard questions of Mr. Juncker. Don't think, all of you, and I can look at the audience, and I'm a man of a certain age, and I can see there's some men and women in the audience who are not dissimilar age to me. I'm unashamedly a baby boomer, and I've lived through fabulous times. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, rising house prices, prosperity, experimentation, actually the emancipation of women. It's been a fantastic kind of rock and roll of a lifestyle I've had, and I owe the founders of the post-war settlement my 6.5 wonderful decades. But you can't assume the next 6.5 decades are going to be as good. And I just want to run through why that might be the case. There are so many parallels between what's happening now and what happened at the end of the 19th century. Enormous era of turbulence. Unregulated capitalism triggered immense inequalities, fantastic kind of migration of people, and it sat side by side for enormous technological change. I mean, my grandfather was born in a world of horse-drawn transport with no flight and no radio and television. He died 80 years later through having lived through the most extraordinary period of technological change. I'm going to say a bit about that in a minute. That's coming towards us too, destabilizing business models, leading to enormous churn of companies rising, companies falling, sectors rising. That all happened without really there being any international framework. The gold standard fell apart. There was no social safety net, and there became impossible international tensions, culminating, of course, in World Wars I and II. Question mark. Is humankind after going to live through another more decades like that before we relearn that actually the anti-enlightenment, and I'm going to be brutal, right-wing or outright principles which sit behind that anti-enlightenment kind of crusade that actually lead to perdition, conflict, economic stagnation, and diminished lives? Maybe we have to live through that to discover that actually, if we want to join with Kant in daring to know, we have to agree that there can be evidence and there can be facts that are indisputable. You can have your opinions, but you can't have your facts. You can't construct alternative realities. You can't believe that the world is what you want it to be if it's probably not that. Climate change is man-made. If you're on the right in Britain and America, that cannot be true, because it means that there has to be a collective international response, and that is coercive and denies freedom, and therefore cannot be true. Maybe we have to go through disasters to learn that actually Enlightenment propositions have to be rediscovered. And I just want to quickly go through a number of challenges and then just ponder at the end where we're going. I first of all want to put it to you that you're about to live through a period of enormous change. Who knows the phrase general purpose technology? An audience of 500 people. I'm introducing you to an idea. So one thing you know now that you didn't know at the beginning of this lecture. That is fantabulous. I've said something original. A general purpose technology is a technology which, although it starts in a particular sector, agriculture, transport, energy, is of such importance to that sector that there are monumental spillover effects. And what's more, the technology contains in its own gene formation the capacity to carry on renewing itself and becoming more and more important. So actually, when 9,000 years ago they first started domesticating animals and crossbreeding them, that might seem an agricultural phenomenon. But without that, no boost in agricultural productivity, no urbanization, and actually the great civilizations on the Tigris and the Euphrates, where it all began, would never have started. And so it goes on. It was general purpose technologies, and you can make this argument, that actually have changed the world. The capacity to put a third mast on a sailing ship might have seemed a trivial thing to do, but it eluded kind of shipwrights for 200 years before the Spanish managed to do it in Cadiz in the end of the 15th century. That allows you to actually sail close to the wind. You can sail to Latin America and back. You can bring silver and gold from Latin America. You can trigger the great European inflation. You can trigger the rise of Protestantism. You can invent Switzerland. You can invent maritime Europe. You can, from building the third mast on a sailing ship, as a general purpose technology. And there's a bunch of them here. I won't bother you with all of them. They're fascinating. But as you can see, there's more of them every century. In the 21st century, the innovation theorists believe that there will be as many as 20 general purpose technologies. And already, with artificial intelligence and the fourth industrial revolution, machine learning and gene technology, nanotechnologies, we are living through these extraordinary technologies. There's a whole story, by the way, about how they actually happen. They're mixed economy, Enlightenment phenomena, these things, they don't actually get invented by people having light bulb moments in a kind of Ayn Rand universe of individualism. There's a public-private story, but that's a digression. The pace of them has been accelerating. There is a list of some of them that are coming towards you. When I first put the list together, actually, which is a year or two back now, it seemed, some of those ideas, nanotechnologies and health informatics, were seen, ahead of the curve. Now, it's you'd have to add machine learning to it, you know this. I don't need to spend too much time on this. It's just the last bullet points actually are worthwhile. There isn't a sector, there is not a sector which won't be touched by artificial intelligence, big data, the Internet of Things, digitization. It's just whether it could be transport, it could be finance, it could be the city, it could be the university, it could be teaching, it can be learning. Everything is going to change. And old jobs are going to be, and old skills are going to be made redundant, and new sectors are going to be born. I personally think we're going to have, I don't believe we're going to have mass unemployment. There will be transitional unemployment, no question, but human beings' desires and wants are infinite, and actually we will teach each other, coach each other, look after each other, care for each other in old age, and much more in this new environment than we've done hitherto. Professions like being space guides or growing miniature Japanese gardens in tower blocks and God knows what, gender reassignment consultants. There will be whole new professions that you have not even thought of in 2017 will come into being. The question is, how well will they be paid? Will people be able to kind of build a family and live a life they've reason to value? And how will inequality kind of manifest itself in this new order? So that's one challenge. And I won't bother you with that. Another challenge is that actually companies have been depurposed. And the globalization has actually taken away owners. Companies are not owned by people who share their purpose, want the core principles of the founder to be kind of lived through. Actually, in Switzerland, slightly better behaved than in Britain and in America, but you can see the same trends at work. It's what you're watching, in my view, is a kind of amoralization of capitalism. On Monday, I'm bringing out with some colleagues a big report in Britain on the purposeful company, arguing that companies had been depurposed and arguing for a string of measures that actually might put a bit of purpose back into enterprise. But actually, the rise of enormous inequality, the kind of stunning disregard. I don't know what the car manufacturers were doing in fiddling those tests for NOx emissions. They knew what they were doing, but they betrayed the customers with whom they have some kind of, more than a contract. It's a covenant with your customers, and Volkswagen certainly betrayed that. So you have this kind of eclipse of commitment. Who owns, who stewards, who imparts purpose to our great companies, even as they navigate this avalanche of technological change moving towards them? And this capitalism is actually not particularly friendly to kind of innovation. I might come back to that in the question and answer session, because I want to kind of put the case on the table and not bore you too much. I remember whenever I have a lecture and the lecturer gets to kind of, the third of 6 points, you think, oh shit, there are 3 points to come. Let's get to the end and have a drink. So I'll move through this quickly. But there may be some people in the audience, graduate students and some professors and some young businessmen who are interested in this kind of open innovation phenomenon. Because one of the ways that, in my view, you navigate all the possibilities that contemporary technology is throwing up is by being non-siloed, is by being open, is by recognizing interdependence, by looking for trust relationships with your interlocutors so you can share scientific knowledge to figure out answers together. In short, open innovation is the route to wealth generation in the 21st century, and it's underpinned, you know what, by Enlightenment values. Steve Jobs would say that at Apple. Steve Bezos would say that at Amazon. And I say that, co-founder of the Big Innovation Center. So there you go. And we're only about 10 people, so that's really important. Another challenge, rogue finance. You know, we've discussed this turbulence, technological turbulence, a kind of depurposed capitalism. You know, our banking systems are still fantastically fragile. What we were up to in the 20 years up to 2008, in which we allowed a fractional reserve banking system to build balance sheets the size of Mount Eiger. I was going to say the Everest, but I'd switch it to Switzerland. Small joke. But I think we'll go back to Everest, actually. Vast balance sheets, which they claimed weren't risky. Never in economic history has so much debt been lent to so many dubious people, underwritten by so little capital, with the people doing it rewarded so extravagantly. And that process is still going on. And you know what? Donald Trump wants to make it easier by attacking the kind of half-built regulatory evidence of Dodd-Frank, because it gets in the way of actually, as his banker friends, actually, as I said in a recent column, far from draining the swamp, Donald Trump is opening the sluice gates on this, making actually, once again, exposing the United States to the risk of another financial crisis. Rogue finance, depurposed companies, incredible technological change. Doesn't it feel a bit like that period in 1870 and 1910? And then there's Trump. Actually, I can almost ask anyone to come out here and give this next leg of this. Actually, I mean, what can we say about Donald Trump? Well, actually, I tell you what I can say about Donald Trump, because I would be quite. I mean, look, 2,400 counties voted for him. You know, he talks about his movement, and in Geneva and in liberal Oxford and liberal London, it's quite easy to laugh, as it is in liberal New York and liberal LA. But actually, they're cheering him on. They think that his tweets and getting tough with the Australian Prime Minister over a kind of Obama deal to let immigrants in from Australia. Well, why was America doing that? Of course he wants a wall built with Mexico. Of course he wants jobs brought back from the American border. Why should Monterrey in Mexico kind of be one of the boom towns in North America, courtesy of American multinationals sorting their production there and stripping jobs out of Youngstown, Ohio? It's not. We may dislike his executive order on 6 states bringing to try and inhibit bad people, all Muslim, into the United States, none of which, we note, there's a Trump hotel built in. But it plays well. It plays well in those 2,100 counties. You think he's going to be impeached? Well, think again. It's a Republican Congress. You think he won't win again in 4 years' time? Can you be sure? He is squaring up to the Chinese. I am terrified of what they might do in Iran, abandoning even the charade. Wasn't quite a charade, but a kind of abandoning the kind of distant hope, but never to be achieved, of a 2-state settlement in Israel. This man is perfectly capable of waging war. Steve Bannon, who he's promoted and one of the reasons why he found it so difficult to get a national security kind of that position filled. This Steve Bannon, believes that in the health, rather like some Nazis did, the health of war, that actually every 70, 80, 90 years, it's really important to have a war to remoralize a civilization. Right-hand person to Donald Trump. He also believes that Britain made a first-order mistake in not fighting Germany in 1906, the Agadir crisis, and permitted actually there to be a First World War in which actually by holding the challenger state back exhausted the British Empire and actually meant it lost its hegemonic position worldwide, and that the United States should not make the same mistake with China. We have to hope that the checks and balances in the American system will work. I don't know personally, but I know one or two of the people who've taken jobs, senior jobs, in the Trump administration. And they're doing it, as one said, as retailed to a friend of mine who retailed it to me, he's taking a bullet for his country. He's taking this job because he is not going to get the United States position where it finds itself in war. Who knows what's going to happen in this fantastic Enlightenment republic that is the United States of America, and so much of which we admire and have been inspired by. I talked about my own life. I've lived a life against a background of American movies and American rock and roll and American liberalism, to no avail. Brexit. Again, you all know the story. What I want to say here is that everyone should know that this is a right-wing coup in the same manner that there's a right-wing coup in the United States. This was driven by a dozen people. There was a brilliant campaign logo, Take Back Control, which played into this kind of anti-Enlightenment populist mood prevalent in all our countries. And they, backed by the press, they did it. And had any one of a number of things been different, they wouldn't have done it. And they wouldn't have done it because, I want to say this as strongly as I can, there is not an anti-European Union majority in Britain. There is not support in the business community. The top 350 companies, I doubt more than a dozen have got Brexiteers in majority on their boards. Not true in finance, not true in law, not true in accountancy, not true in insurance, not true in agriculture, not true in higher education, not true in creative industries, not true in the arts, not true in museums, not true in the military, not true in the civil service. Where you find anti-European Union majorities is actually there was a majority of adults, 18 and 65, voted by 52 to 48 to stay in the European Union. The majority to leave the European Union in Britain came out of the over 65s and actually people in second-rung cities of less than 150,000 people who, for one reason or another, the system had not worked well, and who were able to be gulled by this passionate media. This stored, by the way, in my account of the world order being at risk, the centre-right media and the way in which the media has been weaponized by the political right is an essential part of the story. So what do I think? I mean, are the European Union negotiators going to be clever to kind of land a particular fish? Mrs. May needs to see the Union Jack going down on the flagpole outside the European institutions. We have to leave the European Union. and then we have to immediately rejoin it. We have to have a comprehensive trade deal with the European Union. We will put our defence and our security establishment at service of European defence and security forces. We will want a relationship with European research and European universities, hence the Europaeum. And it's growing importance in the way it's seen, actually, not in our university, Paul and I was talking to the Vice-Chancellor only last night, who's kind of very keen on our relationships with European universities. And so for having been 2/3 in the European Union, because we had all those opt-outs, not in the Euro, not in Schengen, and all the other opt-outs, we will become 1/3 in, because that's actually how you interpret a 52-48 vote. That's what Mrs. May wants to land, but whether it's possible to negotiate it quickly enough, whether she can take her own rabid right-wing press and party with her, and whether not very smart people like Juncker and Barnier can actually land this fish, I just don't know. It could go terribly, terribly wrong. Bad, I think, for Britain, and not very good for the European Union. And an enormous, we need this to happen if we want the international trade order to stay open. I also profoundly regret that it wasn't easier to sell the European Union to my fellow countrymen and women. It got itself into all kinds of stuff it shouldn't really have got itself into. It wasn't an easy sell. It's not an easy sell in France. It's not an easy sell in Italy. And it's an increasingly hard sell in Germany. And actually thinking through what the European Union could be, and actually persuading people that even imperfect though it is, one must stand by it, because countries in our continent working together to deliver a common purpose and a common interest can only be a good thing. It may be ignoble. There may be all kinds of compromises. There may be all kinds of small order corruption. What do you expect? We're human beings. But it's a noble enterprise. You stand by the European Union. I love hearing Macron speak in France. He talks in these terms. And even Schulz manages it in Germany. I wish we had a politician like that or like them in Britain. China. Who read President Xi's extraordinary speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos? There, 1, 2. Wasn't it an extraordinary speech? Unbelievable, wasn't it? I mean, there he was, here's a man who had, on the flight over, kind of signed an order for the abduction of a prominent Hong Kong businessman, who had only a few months earlier just lifted the ban on the export of special earths to Japan because of ongoing argument about war crimes, is trying to build artificial islands in the South China Seas. Here was Xi parading himself as the upholder, the inheritor of a liberal international order, and making a damn good job of it, wasn't it? I mean, it was an extraordinary speech. He was against protectionism. He was for open trade. He was for standing beside your treaties. He insisted that climate change is a man-made phenomenon and that China must step up to the plate in actually cutting carbon dioxide emissions. I mean, it was absolutely jaw-dropping, and of course opportunistic and very smart. And you question you all have to ask yourself is China, as the US and the UK vacate the World Trade Organization, and is it going to be China that leads the charge to openness, starting in Asia and working out? Now here's a country which, where I call the Chinese system Leninist corporatism, because of course the party is everywhere. Marx said that any organization with more than 8 people in it was definitionally exploitative. In 2017, every organization in China with more than 8 people has a member of the Communist Party either on its board or on a supervisory council to make sure that it's not exploitative, or put another way, to make sure the party rules everywhere. Can this country, which has made this wonderful transition of bringing so many hundreds of millions out of poverty in the last kind of 40 years, can it go the next level? Can it go from being a middle income, kind of less developed country to being at the frontier? Can nearly 1.3, rising 1.4 billion people have kind of get themselves up from $15,000 a head per capita incomes to American levels of $40,000 a head? And here's my hypothesis. I argue that it's impossible in a one-party state to do that. You can't experiment, you can't pilot. Oh, excuse me. He's just on the phone, actually. And my passport's dropped out as well. I'm sorry, I thought I turned this off. There we are. Yeah, I left it on because I wanted Paul to know where I was and forgot to turn it off. It's the open question, I think. And actually, it's not open. China, if it is to become, she gives these speeches saying the old growth model is now kind of gone and the new growth model is going to be about innovation because it wants to capture all these general purpose technologies and house them in China. Can it do it, setting its face against Enlightenment values? I think it can't. The story of the next 10 years will be seeing whether it can. I predict a revolution from below within a decade in China. Because they just have to have the rule of law, the party is legitimate, the corruption is endemic. And lastly, intellectual. We've got to fight for Enlightenment values. I mean, the whole kind of economic case that was mounted, you don't need social contracts, taxation is a burden. There's not time to run through that bunch of propositions, but many of you will know, without my detailing it, what the task is. So, we conclude. Is it going to get worse before it gets better? Who thinks it's going to get worse before it gets better? Show of hands. Okay, very good. Who thinks it's going to get better? It's getting better all the time. Who's abstaining because they don't know? You're like me, that's why you're here, I guess. You're overwhelming pessimist. But yeah, look, where are the countervailing economic and political power? Where are working class institutions in 2017? Where are vigorous trade unions that can underpin social democratic parties that might actually try and sell Enlightenment values to members? One of the great things about trade unions, they may have pitched wages above some clearing level of wages, and they may have inhibited some change at the margin, as the OECD used to argue. But God, were they good at socializing working class men and women into thinking straight about their relationships with each other, with women, with their family, and with their societies. There were things that you could and couldn't say. There were, you learnt your, as we say in English, your P's and Q's in trade unions. And actually, we've got rid of them. We've made it harder and harder for people to join them. We put nothing in their place. Ordinary people living in this gig economy of 0-hour contracts, of non-standard employment, in which organizations are ephemeral, looking to source production where it can take some cost out of the bottom line, where they are notations in a spreadsheet, who can they look to provide countervailing power? Our weaponized media, who is going to make the argument that actually, I don't want to live in a world of truthiness and your truth and my truth. I believe in evidence. I believe in facts. I believe in science. I'm a creature of the scientific revolution. The architecture of my college was designed to represent a repudiation of kind of high Oxford, high church values and a celebration of what the architects thought would be 20th century progress in science. It's in my blood. It's in your blood. We have to find a language which says no. Have to buy the papers and watch the television and radio, listen to the radio, that actually tries to adhere to evidence. Who's going to repurpose enterprise? How are we going to make a case for an activist state? How do we defend the United Nations? And someone was telling me last night there's a United Nations, there's not just every United Nations agency has an office in most cities in the world. So you go to most big cities in the world, you find not one, not two, not three, but a dozen UN agencies. To someone wanting to be skeptical about it, why isn't there just one or two? Meanwhile, one of the consequences of jihadism is this enormous growth of refugees. Trade protection growing, the fourth industrial revolution intensifying. I think those people put their hand up to say it's going to get worse. I'm sorry, I think you're probably right. But, we could think about a better idea. We could think about repurposing enterprise. We could try to think about, we could try, you all save your pensions. Why can't, you direct it to the kind of enterprise that you would like to see? We like Unilever in my country. We don't like Kraft Heinz. There was a big bid recently. Why don't we think about, why don't we think about what a social, let's be utopian. Actually, one of the great things about Enlightenment figures was they were utopians. They had an idea of what a great future was. I mean, I never went to Israel when kibbutzim were kind of the great deal in the 60s, but it was an idea, I know it sounds amazing, but in the 60s, there was a moral case for Israel, and the kibbutzim were a way of kind of reimagining how one lived. Utopian idealism for our young, having an idea how building companies in which employees have voice and participation. We can actually think of different ways we want our society to be organized around Enlightenment values in the 21st century, like our forebears did. We can uphold the World Trade Organization. Any WTO employees in the room? There should be. We can do a bunch of things. You can run your eye down those bullet points. We can march, we can campaign, we can protest. But here's my fear, that you're right, the majority here, that it will get worse before it gets better. Maybe we have to live through some disasters before minds get changed. It's why some of the smarter billionaires are buying their houses in New Zealand fields and South Island, because it's the place where, when there's a nuclear war, there'll be less fallout. But I'm a kind of Tigrish guy, and I don't want to leave you kind of going into the Geneva night without hope. And here's what I sometimes say to people. I think we all have a responsibility at moments like this. Every conversation you have, you don't let nonsense pass unchallenged. In a club, in a bar, in a bus stop, in a restaurant, in a seminar room, wherever you find it, take it on. We have to stand by, and let's stand by the institutions that we have for all their warts. I've tried to speak passionately about the European Union tonight. I feel equally strongly about the World Trade Organization, poor damn thing, which requires, which is actually, tries to create protocols and structures to keep world trade open. Let's stand by these imperfect institutions. Let's try and reform them, because they are better than mayhem. We all have a responsibility to argue for them at the macro level and in every single conversation we have in every waking minute of every waking day. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this fascinating talk, which raises a lot of questions. So the floor is open for questions from the audience. There are micros. Who will start? Charles Wiplosch. He has his hand in favor of things going better. So.
Thank you. I think you obviously want to be challenged, so let me try. I mean, the talk was Brexit and Trump, and you characterized these as right-wing coup. Now, I have problem with that. They were not coup. They were decisions coming from perfectly working democracy in fair elections. So calling that a coup is a bit going far. And I think what we need to do is to think why these crazy ideas behind Trump and Brexit, why did they win? Why were these ideas right? Why did so many left-wingers actually vote for Trump and for Brexit? So I think what makes me uncomfortable with your talk is that you seem to be sure that what you say is right, while what you say is what we were all saying until Trump and Brexit, and obviously we got it all wrong. And I think instead of heating up, as you were suggesting, we should be very, very self-critical and ask where we have been very silly. And it's exactly the same holds for Europe. I am true European, I'm completely convinced about enlightenment, but I think European has gone the wrong way, not because of Mr. Juncker and Barnier, but because just what has been doing over the years, huge mistakes might have been made, otherwise none of that would have happened. So I would have liked to hear you being a bit self-critical.
Take the mic.
Oh, okay.
No, it's open. It's open.
It's open, is it? Okay. Oh, sorry. Good point, Charles. And and of course, I think two or three things actually. I mean, first of all, of course, I accept the rebuke, but I one of the things that I observe amongst the politicians of the right in both Britain and America is that actually it hasn't been self-criticism or doubt or any sense that there might be kind of flaws in their argument have got them to where they've got to. I mean, they've just uninhibitively gone for it. And and in a way, your voice is not dissimilar to many people in Britain. This I view I share with a mutual friend of ours, Amartya Sen, who I don't get it that the 48% who voted to stay in the European Union should now kind of say we got it wrong, we should be self-critical, and actually we should go along with a course of action which is going to be, at best, self-harming and could be, in some parts of our economy and society, catastrophic. And we have to be, and I think at moments like this, we have to be fierce about what we stand for, what we think. I think because otherwise it's kind of taking on an army with plowshares. I think that's the first point to me. And I did try to say, and the reason I use the word coup, of course it's not a 19th century coup. I mean, when the word coup, you have an idea of armies and radio stations being captured and men in uniforms rounding up intellectuals. And of course, it was a 21st century coup. A 21st century coup in which actually, a weaponized media in the hands of proprietors who are very sympathetic to kind of right-wing ideologues, nakedly have constructed a world in which facts become disputable and can't be trusted, and you have my facts, and I have my facts, and they're co-equal important, and all of that and that culture is not of my making, and I'm not going to be self-critical about it. It's been made by others and imposed on me and on you and on us. And the results are as we are living through. And so I do think, and maybe tonight, and I accept the rebuke again, maybe tonight I was, in parts of what I said, over the top. But I was deliberately trying to both analyse what's going on and be fierce about what can be done to put it right. But thank you for the challenge.
Well, thank you and good evening. You talked about China and may they sort of come as a new trade power or liberal champion. We heard Russia's foreign minister who called for a post-West world order. And what do you think of it? And how, say, Russia and China can come together on the East, trying to put an order that used to be West-centered? Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's going, the European Union and the United States, constitute, what is it? 40% now of world GDP and falling. Nearly all the growth in trade and GDP growth in the last 20 years has come from emergent economies and China in particular. The balance of world economic power is without doubt changing. And this is one reason why I do make my argument for Enlightenment values as strongly as I do, because I think that the Prime Minister May, in a meeting with Donald Trump, tried to argue that it was the marriage of English-speaking peoples that underpinned an open world trade system, an open world trade system, and actually I thought Xi was very effective in saying and arguing in his speech in Davos that's not the case. There are ineluctable universal reasons for openness. Now, I know, and you know, that actually he may say that alongside Charles Schwab, but the country he runs does not live by those values. And I think one of the reasons I'm fierce about it is because I think that I read a book on China, and I was introduced to a group of Chinese businessmen and regulators, and there was a couple of, it was a dinner, and it was outside Shanghai. It's been a kind of image being left with me for many years. And after dinner, we were walking to the array of black official limousines that pick you up, because it was a party event. And I'd been making this case, and I was told that that actually the Chinese didn't actually want a free press, they didn't actually believe or need in Western conceptions of law, and that these were very deep Western notions, and actually, and then there was a couple of young men who hung back, and both said to me simultaneously that actually I should not leave with the view that in China they were colluding in a system of arbitrary imprisonment without trial, that actually not able to trust what you read, that I was right to think that was not a good society, and I should stand by it and not be hoodwinked into thinking that China was a special case. That was only in 2009. And they went on to say that they thought that, one said that before he retired, he wanted his children to live in a different kind of China. And many people said to me privately that the whole place is a volcano waiting to blow. So I think that, this notion that actually we're a busted flush in the West, and that our values are shot to bits, and actually we can look to these new powers to kind of run things in a benevolent, open, kind of rule of law way, I don't buy. That's one reason I'm so concerned, and it's one of the reasons why I think that not living by our values and kind of colluding in or being self-critical about why Trump and Brexit have happened is a mistake. We have to argue now at this moment in time in our civilization, in world fortunes, we have to argue for certain sets of principles, I think.
Maybe we take 2, 3 more questions to end.
Let's take
Please.
2 or 3 and then
Yes,
ask them all
okay.
once.
Here,
And then everyone can go.
here.
Thank you very much.
No, just speak.
It's closed. No, it's open. Well, I'm abolishing the world order completely and redrawing it. Why? Because we, a very small minority of people, actually created a deeply unjust society. And actually, it's not very difficult to realize it when we look around, especially if we go to global south like Turkey, India, or any other country in the world. We have favored openness to an extent that actually we are even trading our waste, and we are expecting the others in other parts of the world to develop through our garbage. So we should immediately redraw the system. So I wonder if you would agree with me if I argue that the current rise of right-wing parties, both in Europe and the United States, is actually antithesis of something that was quite wrong already. And then we are moving very fast toward the synthesis, which will be waiting to be drawn by us. And maybe that synthesis will be a collective work, something like Wikipedia. So I wonder your views about it. Thank you.
Okay.
No, there was somebody behind you.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Ali Basika. I'm a former graduate from this institute. I had a question about, you were talking about the figures in Brexit and the election of Trump, and talking about how so many people voted for them. But I feel the problem now is that we have a lack of, we need reconciliation in these countries in a lighter way. But no one's talking about how we need to do that. If there are 52% of British people that voted for Brexit and 48% that didn't, and everyone's angry at each other, and I feel that there's absolutely no way of trying to talk about it. And I was wondering if you had anything to say about that, because I think it's the same thing that's happening in the US.
last question here.
Thank you. You've been talking about weaponized media. There's also unarmed media. I was wondering, I'm a reporter, and I admit it was very challenging to cover the Trump phenomenon. And I was wondering, you as a former editor of The Observer, how do you think journalists should cover what's going on there, since we live in a way in a fact-free world, in the Trump world, a world in which fake news are thriving and where words tend to lose their meanings? How do you think journalists should cover this, what's going on now with the Trump phenomenon? Thank you.
Thank you. Look, great questions, and I'll be very brief. Look, on your taking that last question first, and I think the American media is doing a good job, actually. I think it's asking some really hard and tough questions of the Trump administration, and I think you're one of the checks and balances in the American system is a vigorous media, and it's striking actually that even reporters on Fox News have found some of the antics at some of these press conferences kind of impossible to take, in that respect, I think the American media is still vigorous and still holding truth to power, in a way actually which is done less in Britain. I have to say, the media in Britain is very weaponized, and I mean really good questions about Brexit and its fallout and why it's happening and are simply not being asked, it's ancient verities. I'm afraid it's ancient verities. It is journalists being resourced well enough, and that's the whole question, I know, to kind of ask the questions that need to be asked and carrying on quarrying to put information in the public domain. Journalism is in my blood. It's in my DNA. And I believe in it. And I actually think the best way of fighting fake news is real news. And I think actually in the end, real news drives up in a kind of reverse of Goodhart's law. I think real news drives out bad news. Look, on this question of how to get a conversation going, and I mean, in a way, both questions were similar. I wrote my first essay as a 15-year-old arguing against referenda because I thought they were phenomenally clumsy kind of democratic instruments. And now we're seeing the results of that. I mean, the impact of a referenda in a parliamentary democracy like Britain, which are so poorly designed. I mean, at least in Switzerland, when you hold a referendum, there's there's some effort taken so that both sides know what they're voting for, and I mean, in Britain, it was comic the way in which the referendum was set up. In which those who were voting for Leave, were able to get away with not saying what Leave meant, nor having to write it down. So that citizens had no conception, apart from a general kind of sense that was the direction they wanted to go in, what it would actually mean. And I think it's hardly surprising in the aftermath, it's difficult to get a conversation going. I mean, I don't feel minded to run at the white flag and say, you know what, the views I've held all my life are suddenly wrong. That's not how a parliamentary democracy works. You put your views to the electorate, every 4 or 5 years, and you then try and refashion them, and you put them again, and then your representatives kind of argue it out in the legislature, and thus it goes on. But to be invited to kind of repudiate everything you believe in by such a narrow vote was always going to be toxic. And actually,
how you get a conversation going, I think that one of the reasons it's so hard to get a conversation going is that that those people who are in favour of Brexit, they don't actually command, as I try to say, it's a very thin base, a very thin base of support. We'll see. You'll wake up tomorrow morning, but I will be very surprised if UKIP, that's the UK Independence Party, win a seat in these 2 parliamentary by-elections, particularly in Stoke. And if they can't, and Nigel Farage tried 7 times to win a parliament, to get a seat in the House of Commons and couldn't. The only way that he could get parliamentary representation was in a PR system in the European Parliament. And then he used the funds that he got from the European Parliament to kind of campaign for Britain to leave the European Union. Deep irony. So don't worry. Countries and peoples come back together again, but you shouldn't expect it easy to get a conversation going after such events. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a late start because of a Swiss plane and a Swiss cab, but we enjoyed your very rich, dense, and passionate lecture. So please join me in thanking our guest.